Hey there everyone and welcome. I am so happy to have you here. I am Jeff. This is Tabletop Toolbox and I am excited to share with you episode number 58 of the weekly Ratchet. This has been a week full of solos and expos and who knows whatever else, and I'll share all of that with you and more right here on the weekly Ratchet. Hello there everyone and welcome again. Thank you so much for joining me here on the weekly Ratchet, and as always I hope you've had a fantastic week of getting to play some board games with family and or friends. At the top of the show, I especially want to welcome our 100 new subscribers to the channel in just the past week. It started last week with a sort of a slow roll as my appearance on the Sporadically Bored podcast aired, but then also last week I put out a video of 10 fantastic solo board games, and that has really taken off. I mean, I have just been kind of blown away with the response to that video. I've been meaning to put that out for years, and I just kind of kept putting it off. I kept thinking of ways to do something different, to do something bigger, and I finally just said, look, I've got to just do it the way I do it. And like I said, the response to that has been fantastic. So welcome all of you, and thank you to everyone who has joined the channel. If this is your first weekly Ratchet, let me introduce you a little bit to this concept. This is a usually weekly show. I did not put out an episode last week, but a weekly show that I just call a board game themed variety show. It has changed a little bit over the past little over a year, but nowadays I do a segment on new games that have come in, whether they're review copies or just things that I have picked up. I also do a segment on recently played games, kind of some miniature reviews, if you will, on some recently played titles. But then I also have a segment called Question of the Week, where I invite you, the audience, to weigh in on a variety of topics, whether they are fun or interesting or entertaining, maybe even a little controversial. I like to engage everyone as part of the show. So be sure to stick around for that, and I'm looking forward to seeing some new engagement. Again, I'm very, very excited to have some new folks here. That's mostly it for the top of the show. Just one thing I do want to share real quick. Back in episode number 55, we did a topic of favorite board game accessories, and I shared then that one of my favorite accessories is a music stand that I sort of keep nearby, especially when I'm playing big, complicated games, to sort of keep things organized, like rule books or other, just sort of pamphlets that go as part of the game. It's time to change my answer, because if you look just slightly on the edge of the frame here, you'll see a gray cloth plush desk chair. I picked up a whole set of these things for the game room. We've only used them a couple of times so far, and we love them. These are absolutely fantastic. They are very soft, big plush desk chairs, with folding armrests and the hydraulic lifts and the whole 9 yards. And these things are just fantastic. So I'm officially changing my answer from a music stand to plush, comfy desk chairs as my favorite board gaming accessory. And folks, I think that is a perfect time to go ahead and jump into some new games. All right, going to go ahead and jump into some new games. A few things. Now, first of all, I didn't get an episode out last week, and I do very much apologize, but I did not play or touch a board game at all last week. My daughter, as I mentioned, was in a school musical, the Beauty and the Beast Junior musical. I'd love to share some images and photos from that, but it does have other kids in it, and for YouTube reasons, I really shouldn't do that, so I won't. But anyways, I appreciate folks kind of being patient for a week, and I do like to think that I got some other good stuff out as a result of taking that time off. Anyways, the other thing I'll share is that in this past weekend, actually just yesterday, today is Sunday the 4th of May, yesterday there was a board game expo right here in the Midlothian, Virginia area, down just south of Richmond, and it was hosted at the Unplugged Games Cafe, a place I've mentioned several times in the past. And they had a bunch of tents and tables set up. They were doing some small board game demos. I think they had Finspan out. There were a couple of merchants out selling some stuff. And then we were invited as local gamers to simply go out and rent a table for a fair price and try and sell some board games. I did offload a bunch of stuff. I only picked up a couple things. I behaved. I kept it reasonable, especially since I already bought some other stuff during the week. Let me go ahead and get to it. So up first, this is an older game. This is Altiplano by Renegade Games. This was actually on my Dice Tower Top 100 list. I don't remember which position it was, if I'm being honest, but I mentioned in that video that this is one of the only games on that list I did not have. I believe the other one was Windmill Valley, if that's the right, yes, Windmill Valley, which I since purchased, and this was the last one on the list that I did not have. I picked this one up, of course, used, and I do know that there are some expansions and some upgrades for it. I'm going to kind of look to slowly maybe kind of build that up. But just kind of excited to have this one in the collection. Altiplano. Up next, I did get an expansion to the Fields of Arl game. That one came in, I believe, in the last episode. This is the Tea and Trade expansion. Now, what this does is adds room for a third player in the game, but it also adds a tea expansion and a couple other little things. And what the tea does is kind of lets you empower your actions to sort of maybe even take a stronger version of that action, or even double the effect of that action, effectively taking it twice if you use tea in the game. I have not gotten to even organize this yet. What I really need to do is get an organizer either purchased or made for Fields of Arl, because there are, as with most Uwe games, just a ton of little tokens and tiles and such, things that you can't just you stack them, but they just don't go back into the box neatly. You got to either throw them in bags or just put them in loose, which is a terrible idea. So I need to look into a way of better organizing this. I'll be talking about this one actually here in just a little bit. That was Fields of Arl. Up next, I have Great Western Trail El Paso. This is a review copy provided by Asmodee. I'll be checking this out here, probably not this coming week, but the week after. My buddy Daniel is very excited in checking out this game. He is a big Great Western Trail fan. I honestly am not. I've always kind of joked that Great Western Trail is kind of the Call of Duty of board games. They just keep coming out with new versions and people just keep buying them. I did not like Argentina. I haven't met many people who do. The newer version, I'm blanking on the name of the town, but that game was pretty decent. I was kind of okay with the second edition Great Western Trail, but it was taught poorly to me the first time I played it. So anyways, I had this because it's a review copy. This is supposed to be a much more streamlined, light, easy version. This one says, I think it's only a 60 to 90 minute game, only ages 12 and up, versus I believe 14 and up for the other Great Western Trail games. Lots of cards, some kind of simple stuff here in the back, but we will be checking that out for sure in the near future. Great Western Trail El Paso. Also from the Board Game Expo, I picked up Knar. I'm not really sure. It is a Viking-themed game from Pandasaurus Games. Look, every time I've seen this box, I've thought that's my name on the top. It has always caught me off guard. I don't know why. But I've always kind of wanted to check it out. I just didn't really ever want to pay full price for it. And I got this at a really good price. And I've already played it, actually, today. So I'll chat about that here in just a little bit. And then lastly, this one's big and heavy. Another Uwe Rosenberg title. I finally caved and I picked up Black Forest. This one is based on Glass Road, I believe. Sort of almost like a version 2, or I don't know, it's not a remake, but it's sort of an embellishment of the Glass Road system. And in Glass Road, you had these 2 resource wheels. And whenever you gain resources, you kind of just move these wheels. But then once you have one of every resource, you automatically convert it into this glass resource. And so you almost kind of have to be careful, because if you generate a whole bunch of everything, you'll actually end up with none of everything, because it automatically converts itself into glass. So you basically need to make sure that you have none of something, so you can have something of everything else. I did like Glass Road. It was odd, obviously, for that reason, but this one kind of adds this large board. Shut Up and Sit Down has talked about this one quite a bit on recent podcasts and even a review on their channel, and they've just kind of talked about the fact that it's a very sort of an open idea. There's lots of different things that you can do and sort of paths that you can take. They've almost struggled with it because of that reason, but it has sounded appealing to me because of it. So anyways, I did go ahead and get a copy of this. I don't know how soon I will get to this, but hopefully soon. Black Forest by Uwe Rosenberg. That's it for recently played games. So it's time for Question of the Week. All right, here we go. Kicking us off into Question of the Week. 2 weeks ago, I asked you if you could only play one more board game from now until the end of time, what might that game be? And yes, I know this was a bit of a dystopian, sort of unusual topic, especially for this channel. I haven't really gotten into these almost borderline morbid topics of discussion. But look, I was kind of stretching. I was kind of looking for some new ideas. But I did get some interesting conversations, and I will tell you at the end of this, of course, that my good buddy Daniel and I had some deep, rich conversations on this topic. And I think you're going to see some of that in here as well. So let's go ahead and get to some answers. Up first was Wayne Kruger, who said he'd have to cheat like some of the guests on the 5 Games for Doomsday podcast and say Dungeons and Dragons, as it is easily a game you could play forever. Yes, I did kind of rip off this idea from the 5 Games for Doomsday. That's kind of the idea of that podcast. If you only had 5 more games that you could ever play, especially if you were like stuck on a deserted island, what would they be? And Dungeons and Dragons makes a lot of sense. Obviously a game where, you know, the entire thing is sort of powered by your imagination and of course some basic guidelines for rules. So that makes a lot of sense to me, for sure. Up next was Mike Heller, who said he'd be torn between Marvel United and Cthulhu Death May Die, that both offer infinite replayability with their plug-and-play nature, that after years of playing both, he's never played the same game twice. I found that one kind of interesting. Now, I'm not a Cthulhu person, I just never have been. I do have a bunch of Marvel United over here on the other wall, and I agree they have a plug-and-play nature, but I can think of so many other games that do that with more to plug and play with. Like, I've always kind of felt like with Marvel United, yeah, you've got different characters, but you've only got 3 actions to take, right? It's movement, it's fighting, and a special action. I just never really felt like there was really that much diversity to that game. So I found that kind of an odd choice. I would have gone with maybe Marvel Champions personally. But anyways, especially as far as that plug-and-play nature, yes, again, you got lots of replayability, lots of ways to explore that game. If it's the only one you have left, that makes a lot of sense. Penny said without question she would choose Arc Nova. That something about it absolutely fascinates her, and she loves trying to optimize her turns, even with the randomness of the card draws. And I found that kind of ironic because I actually had Arc Nova on my list of solo games last week. I mentioned that the Arno bot that a player created for it was a fantastic solo bot mode that you could play along with. It even has a web app that I absolutely love. It's very impressive. But I was talking to a buddy of mine over the weekend who was saying that there were basically 2 new Arc Nova games coming out. One is a lighter, I believe it's like a tile placement or a tableau building game, but the other one is basically a reworking, like a version 2.0 of Arc Nova, and that one actually kind of upsets me because it's like, for folks who have gone out and customized their copy, which thankfully I haven't done, but I do have the base game and the expansions and a couple little upgrades that I've picked up for it. Now all of a sudden they're kind of tossing all that out and saying there's a new version coming out, and I feel like you gotta wait 10 years before you're doing that kind of stuff. This whole idea of 3-4 years down the line, boom, new version of the same game, that seems a little cash grabby, doesn't it? Anyways, I don't know. That's my take on it. Up next is Teshera, who said that for no other reason than tons of replayability and combinations, he would choose the Imperium lineup, including Legends, Classic, and Horizons. He said he already can't imagine exploring all that those games have to offer, so having them as his only options would give him time to see it all. Wonderflonium also agreed, citing the variability in factions and play styles and the mix and match combinations of Imperium, Legends, Classics, and Horizons. Yeah, I thought about that one too, actually. I was kind of considering this question for myself. Yes, there's a ton of different ways that you can kind of play the game, tons of different factions to explore. I think the only thing for me is that I feel like I would get a little stale just playing card games. Yes, there's a couple little components there to it, but I feel like I would want something a little bit more tactile as far as, components and pieces, more like Arc Nova. I don't know, that's kind of my take on things, but those are definitely games that I think you could play them hundreds of times and never quite play the same game twice. Up next was Simulation Chris, who emphasized the difficulty of the question itself, as there are so many factors to consider, such as number and type of players, but suggested that a simple deck of cards might just work best. Along those lines, Yukon Zach was a bit all over the map, stating that trick-taking being his tried and true mechanism would lead him to pick Scout, but also suggesting that Dune Imperium with all of its expansions would offer tons of content to explore, but also agreed that a simple deck of cards offers hundreds of different games to play. Yeah, Yukon Zach, you cheated a little bit on that one, but of course, it's okay. And I do agree that deck of cards concept is certainly an interesting one. There's so many different things you can do with a deck of cards, tons of games that even I don't know about, but also there have been plenty of games, and we've seen them on Kickstarter and such before, where people have taken that idea of basically 4 suits of 13 or so cards and built entirely new games around them. And then, of course, they usually come out with a specific custom deck showing the art or, whatever of those cards, but you can actually just play them with a regular deck if you sort of reimagine what the values of those cards mean. So that's a very interesting concept. As far as Scout, I don't know about Scout. Man, if I could only play Scout, I don't know. I don't think I'm with you on that one. But anyways, CR Poll also illustrated the challenge of the question itself, stating that the game would need lots of variability and the inability to predict an early winner, suggesting perhaps poker and Monopoly. I don't know about those. I don't know about those myself. I think the whole idea with Monopoly, honestly, is that that game was almost a protest game, right, against capitalism, because of the fact that very quickly you start to see who's winning the game. And when that player is amassing all the money and building all the hotels and controlling the board, they're going to win. They're going to drain everyone else of their money, and you're just kind of waiting for it to happen, right? So I don't know about that one. Poker, I can kind of see that, but again, I think, am I going to want to just be raising and betting and blinding and all that kind of stuff for the end of time? I don't know. Obviously, to each their own, but I don't know about that one. Red Panda Games, a first-time poster, said he'd want to pick a game that's heavy in complexity and asymmetrical so as to offer tons of variety, leading him to pick Root or Hegemony. I considered these as well. Well, I considered Root. I didn't actually consider Hegemony. That is a truly fantastic game. Some friends and I were chatting about that just last week, actually. Root is, I think, an interesting choice, and I really hadn't considered this one. But one thing I'll kind of talk about here a little bit more is that games that offer various modes of play, and Root does do that, of course, if you kind of have everything for it. My only thought with that one is, it's just so confrontational in some of those modes. I just don't know if that's what I would always be in the mood for. But definitely, I agree with you. You want that variety. You want some of that asymmetry. You definitely want a little bit. I would want some complexity at least. And so, yeah, a game that's always offering you different ways of playing it and different things to do in it, I think is certainly a great choice. Peter said it's a difficult question as he has so many games, but said he would probably go with Spirit Island. He mentioned the tons of expansions, variants, ability to play it solo, and change the difficulty as reasons to keep this game unique from play to play. I definitely considered Spirit Island, I think, with the only caveat being that it doesn't offer competitive play. And my buddy Daniel and I were chatting about this quite a bit. We would want a game that let you be competitive, not just cooperative all the time. I think it should have modes of play that would offer competitive and cooperative play. And I'll get more into that here in just a moment. But that's the only reason I don't think I would pick Spirit Island. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's tons of ways to play that game too. It's a fantastic choice if you're comfortable with just playing cooperatively or solo. And lastly, Jeremy Brooks mentioned the game of Heat, Pedal to the Metal, as it offers a variety of courses and handles multiple player counts with ease. I would also mention, of course, that one's got, various modes of play. It's got the career mode. It's got sort of the campaign where you can, or like a tournament style, you can play through multiple races, and it has various, lots of variants and such to it as well, and 2 expansions also. So I agree with that. Jeremy made the comment that I'm not a fan of it, and that's not true. I'm okay with the game. I'm just not a hype man for the game. That game had a ton of hype when it came out. It has died down very quickly because it's a fun game. It's just not the best game in the world that everyone was making it out to be. Anyways, I had a lot of conversations over text with my good buddy Daniel, who I've talked about here for almost ever since the show started. And we were really getting into some deep, almost philosophical conversations. What does this game really need to accomplish? Even he brought up, well, is it a game that I'm going to have to constantly coerce people to play? I kind of had, I think, that initial mindset of, well, yeah, I'm stuck on a desert island and this is all I have, which maybe I'm just by myself, right? Maybe it's me and the volleyball trying to play a board game. But, I kind of got out of that mindset and I was thinking, well, no, let's just imagine this is just the only game that was ever made. We're on Earth, we're all living normal lives, but there's just only one board game to ever play. So again, I would want lots of variety, as a lot of folks have suggested. I want different ways to play it. I want maybe asymmetrical factions. I kind of want all that stuff. But I want to be able to play competitively, cooperatively, and or solo. Daniel, I think, finally landed on Eclipse, Second Dawn for the Galaxy, which doesn't do any of that. It's only a competitive game. It's a fantastic game. It's one of my all-time favorite games, but I don't get to play it very often because when it's competitive, it can be quite cutthroat. Now, I like it at lower player counts where it's a bit more just kind of exploratory and maybe there's a little bit of fighting towards the end, but not a whole bunch. That's the way I like to play it. Obviously, it's not, I think, the core idea to that game. But as crazy as this is for me to say, I can't even believe I'm going with this, but I really think I would pick Voidfall. And as a guy who did the review on the Dice Tower channel and kind of pooped on it a little bit, I will say that game has sort of gained a little bit of stock with me since then because I really do enjoy the puzzle of that game. I really enjoy that, the efficiency idea of it, trying to just wring every little resource, every little point, every little thing out of every turn that you're doing, trying to find ways to generate those combos and do really, really big turns as frequently as you can. It can be played cooperatively and competitively and solo. Now, I will say that the cooperative and solo modes are awful because of how long they take to set up and all the extra stuff that's added in for those. I think I would quickly kind of come up with a way of just leaving some of that crap out. I don't really think it's necessary. It just overcomplicates the game and also drastically lengthens the playtime. And the other thing I kind of thought about was that there's a ton of crap in that box. Little spaceships and little pieces and little figurines and lots of just, components and gears and stuff. And I'll bet you could kind of take that stuff and engineer a few games of your own out of those pieces. And you could also do that with Eclipse and a lot of other games, to be honest with you. But I think that would give me a lot to do with just that one big box. And so I think, again, I can't believe I'm saying it, I would go with Voidfall. Folks, that was Question of the Week. Thank you, as always, for your participation. The next one's going to be kind of interesting, so stick around. For now, let's get to some recently played games. All right, I'm looking forward to telling you about some recently played games. I actually have quite a bunch of games on this list, only a few that you have heard of before, and I'll get through those kind of quickly. Not all these games are new, although a lot of these games are ones I haven't talked about. I was really excited on Friday. My wife took the day off. We had lunch together, and then we just sort of sat and played through some unplayed games. I knocked a couple of things off my shelf of shame because I wanted to see if I could sell them at the expo over the weekend if we didn't like them, and they all went up for sale, and they all came back home. So more on that, though, in a little bit, though. Up first is Deep Shelf by Richard Keene. I played this a little over a week ago with Richard Keene. We actually played this on Tabletop Simulator, and I'm not going to dive into this. At least I'm going to try not to dive into this too much. But he saw my last episode where I talked about playing it, and I did kind of have a lot of just challenges with that game. We played a really, really great game, but it still just felt like kind of a slog. It took us forever to play it, and he was like, you shouldn't be playing this game for this long. Something's not right. So he offered to, sort of coach me through a session, and I was very, very gracious for that. I really was. It was a fantastic experience, but I don't know that it necessarily fixed my thoughts. Now, I did learn a couple things that we were doing wrong, and I do have to kind of cite a couple of vague items in the rules that didn't help with that, but there's still this idea in that each of these factions, there's 5 asymmetrical factions, and each one has a different way of playing. Each one has different strengths and weaknesses. And he even mentioned that there's sort of a path of least resistance for each of these factions. And if you know that and you play it, it makes the game kind of easy, and you'll do well with that faction. He said, of course, you can play these however you want. You can try and do different things with them, but there is that sort of optimal way to play them. And the thing is that if you're playing with people who know that optimal way for the faction that they have, they are going to win, unless you're playing at that same level of expertise. And so Richard wiped my ass all over the floor with this, as expected. I had no doubt whatsoever that was going to happen, but it was kind of like, yeah, I don't know this. I didn't design this game. I'm not going to understand it that well, even though I've played this thing 3 or 4 times already. So there was that. And the other thing was that and I got stuck with it the same way this past week as I did in the previous playthrough, in that there is a quick rule in which you play a card. and then you play a second card, and that card gets stuck through your next round. You get it back at the end of your next turn. And because of that, just because of that action gets locked away from you, there's only 6 or so actions in the entire game, 6 or so cards that you get to play. Because that card gets locked out from you, you have this incredible angst of saying, I need to make sure that my second action that I'm going to take is not an action I'm going to want to take on my next turn, because I can't. And so I want to try and plan this perfectly efficient route through basically 4 actions, not just this turn, but I'm already trying to think ahead to my next turn in case I want to do this thing over again. And it's not always a big deal, but when it is, it's a big deal. And it's the one thing about this game that hits me with AP in a way that I'm not used to. And I started to think about it, that I was like, I just don't know that rule is necessary. I don't really know that it adds enough value, that it adds enough complexity and intrigue and interest in having that card locked out. All it does is it just makes your gears crank harder and kind of frustrates you in some ways. Now, there's also these power actions, and only your second card lets you take that power action. But even if it doesn't, or even if you don't get to use it, that card still gets locked out to you. And I think that if he kept the rule of having the power action that only works as your second card, but you still get all your cards back, it would even keel speed the game up, at least for inexperienced players. I mean, for someone like him, no problem, he knows his way around it. And again, that makes perfect sense. But I feel like for newer players, for let's say amateur players like myself, it makes you stop and think in a way that it just doesn't really feel necessary. Anyways, I really, really appreciate that invitation. I am getting back into working on my review for that game. I will talk more about it, obviously, in an upcoming video. But a big thanks to Richard for that invitation. Up next, I played Fields of Arle. So, talked about getting this one in. This was on my list of solo games. And I have only actually played this twice. I played it with my buddy Daniel, and I really, really, really liked it. And he was like, yeah, I absolutely love this game solo. So I played it solo last week. Really, really just a nice, thinky, immersive experience. It's one of those things where, and Uwe does this with his games in that solo capacity, it does not change anything with the rules. In this case, there is one action that you can't take in the solo game that you would be able to take in the multiplayer game. And it's called a special action. It's I won't get into it. You can check out that video if you want. But you can do anything you want in your turn. There's no managing an AI. There's no extra setup for the AI. It's just, can you try and beat this score? Which I did not. But it becomes a puzzle simply based on how well you can play it, how well you can kind of figure out what buildings are available, what can you build in this game, because those sort of change out from game to game, and just trying to find your path to just generating as many points as you possibly can. And I like it because you're just sitting at a cup of coffee, maybe a beer, and just, okay, what do I want to do? If I can get to this, but first I need to do that. Maybe it's going to take me 3 turns. I'm not going to be in the fall by then. So what's maybe a more efficient way, or can I set myself up for a good spring in the next round, whatever. And it's just a good thinky experience that you don't have to mar with a whole lot of AI stuff or Philly interaction between your own turns. You're never ever sitting there going, oh, wait, did I do the AI's turn? I don't remember if I moved that. No, there's none of that. It's just, I have 2 workers left, and it's my turn again. I really like this. I'm looking forward to getting to try this out solo with the Tea and Trade expansion. I've already played that expansion, just not solo. Anyways, just a great, simple game. It just needs an organizer really bad, as I already mentioned. So that was Fields of Arle. Up next, we played, let me see, it's in this stack here. We played, let me take my for sale sticker off. My wife and I played Kanagawa. This is a game set in ancient Japan, I believe, and you are trying to paint a tapestry. You've got sort of this idea in that you're learning from the master painter, you're sort of gaining extra lessons and extra experience, and then you're going to be drafting these cards from this sort of display. Some of the cards are face up, some of them are face down. You may not exactly know what you're getting, but the back of the cards kind of gives you an idea of what type of thing might be featured in that card. The cards are multi-purpose, only 2 purposes to them. They can be played one orientation to sort of go into your painting, which is this large tableau that kind of stretches across the table, where you can spin them around 180 and tuck them into the bottom half of your sort of play area, and they become upgrades to your studio. And there wasn't as much of an upgrade there as I really sort of expected or hoped to see. You start off with a couple of brushes, which are really nice little components. These brushes, as you gain them, they can be placed onto these upgraded spaces in your studio to let you paint various landscapes in your painting. So each painting, each picture, each portion of that picture has a little landscape icon on the bottom, and when you get one of those corresponding symbols in your studio, you can place a brush on it to then paint, which is to say basically to play a card into your painting. So you can get cards that give you more brushes, you can get cards that give you more of those landscapes to paint, you can even gain the ability to sort of move brushes around. And there's this weird twist, because once the brushes get played, they're sort of stuck in your studio, and you have to use these movement arrows to move them around. Now you start the game off with 2 brushes and 1 movement ability and 1 landscape that you can paint. You're going to eventually gain, obviously, again, more brushes, more arrows, but you gain far less of them than I expected. And I actually was worried that as we got into the game, you're going to have all these arrow icons. You're only allowed to move each brush once per turn. You can only use each landscape icon in your studio once per turn, and I was afraid that you're going to lose track of that once you started to have 4 or 5 brushes and 4 or 5 arrows. Oh my gosh, did I use this one? I don't remember. How many do I have left? I had 2. I think my wife had 3 arrows by the end of the game, and we only played this 2-player, and the game does not scale down for your number of players. So we had to use all the cards. We ended up with this absolutely massive row of cards on the table in front of us, in front of each of us, of all these paintings and all these upgrades. And even with all these upgrades, I still felt like there was so very little that we could actually do that I couldn't even imagine playing this at 3 or 4 players, because of the fact that you might have a player who never gets any of those brush or arrow upgrades in front of them. There's only a couple in the entire game, and it would be terrible to be the one player who just never managed to get any of them for whatever reason. So art-wise, looked fantastic. Rules were fairly simple to understand, but I just didn't really feel like that gameplay itself fleshed out into anything really, really interesting, and that's why it very quickly went up for sale, but is also still here. This is not a game that just, you don't look at this. I mean, it is a very, very pretty cover, but for whatever reason, it doesn't inspire a lot of interest or a lot of excitement. The back of it's not very interesting, and a couple people looked at it and then just set it back down on the table and walked away. Anyways, that was Kanagawa. All right, up next we played, let me bring my screen back up here to help me keep track. Okay, up next we played, actually, you know what? I'm going to pop the lid off of this, because I don't want to dump the components everywhere. This is Space Station Phoenix by Gabriel Cohn. I've talked about this one a couple of times already. We got to play with my brand new organizer. I was very excited to play with those and my little space station miniatures. This is a game about trying to build a space station. You kind of start off with this fleet of ships, and you're trying to build a space station, but one of the major ingredients you're going to need is, of course, steel. And in order to get that steel, most of the time you're going to have to dismantle your own ships to generate the resources to then build the space station, but your ships are giving you the actions. So as you're tearing them apart, you suddenly have less and less actions available to you. Now you can use your opponent's ships as your own actions. You kind of pay them some resources as a trade-off, and there are also these neutral ships attached to the main board in the middle of the table that you can trigger, but they do have higher costs to be able to use. This is an interesting game in that there are these diplomacy tracks that every time a player picks an action, you resolve that track. Whoever is highest on that track will get bonuses. If you are at least beyond the starting position on that track, you will also get bonuses, but not as good of a bonus as other players, potentially. And that's every single turn. So when someone else does a build action, I may get some great benefit out of it, maybe even sort of generating some resources to help me get ready for my next turn. And I like that, although it becomes hyper competitive to get up those tracks and stay ahead of. You can't even just be tied for first place. You've got to be a clear lead in that track to get the better bonuses. And what's interesting is that some of those bonuses usually will let you get more gems, which you're using to pay for your actions, or get points, or just get materials. And a lot of times when we've played this, we've kind of started off getting the gems so we can keep taking more actions, and then later in the game we start forfeiting those gems and instead just taking the points. I didn't do that. I went for points from day one. So right away I was taking a lead across the board. I actually ended the game 22-something points in the lead and lost by about 12 points. I didn't have a great endgame engine. I was kind of surprised at how far I fell behind in the final scoring, but I did still have a good time with this. Man, just playing with this organizer made this thing so easy to set up and play. And so I was really excited to get to play Space Station Phoenix. Up next, we played, let me slide this out. Gotta take my for sale sticker off of this one too. We played Caracas. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'm going to look that up before I put a review out. This is a very, very small game from Koali Games. This is from Peter Joustra. It's kind of like a Carcassonne. You're getting these tiles out, these square tiles, and you kind of have to build them from the top down to some extent on this little river board, or actually it's kind of an ocean board. And the tiles that you're playing are going to have little rivers that sort of come off of that ocean front. And you're also going to have all these animal symbols that come out. You've got a market of 4 cards in the middle of the table, and you're going to start off with one of them on the top of your little ocean board. And when you place that tile into the 4 columns of your own tableau, wherever you place it, whichever column you place it in, dictates which tile you can take from the market immediately after that placement. So you've got like a triangle and a circle and a square and a star symbol or something like that. And so if I place my tile in the square column, I then have to take the square, to take the tile from the square position on the market board, except for maybe it's not the one I want. So it's kind of like, well, I want to put this tile over in the triangular column so I can take that triangular tile I really want. But if I put it here, I'm going to lose a ton of points because the river dead ends, or I've got an animal on this tile, and if I place it next to that one, it's not going to like it, And so it was really kind of weird. There's all these animal symbols. There's like 4 main animals. It was a howler monkey. It was a jaguar. I can't remember the other 2, capybara, and there's one other. And they're very simple, right? Jaguars just don't want to be next to other jaguars. Howler monkeys, you only score the lowest number that you have in a group. Capybaras, you score 1 for everyone in the largest group. And again, I can't remember what the 4th animal was. And those were kind of okay, but then there's a dozen rare animals, and each of them have their own scoring criteria, and they're only listed on a page in the rule book. And there's a bunch of them. And so with every new tile that we kept pulling out of the market, okay, well, hang on, we got to see what that one does. Okay, where can that one? Oh, that can maybe go here. But again, it's in the circle column, and over here is the square column, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to even get it over there. And so it was interesting. It was really, really thinky, and I appreciated it for that. But I didn't like the fact that, again, you're often kind of forced to take suboptimal moves, or to sacrifice some points to try and take another tile. And if you sat there and kind of kept trying to run through all the math, your brain started to smoke. And it really just wasn't a lot of fun. I appreciated their attempt to do something unique, that sort of unique idea of this placement, and that dictates what you get to take. But it would have been a lot more, I think you could have had a lot more fun with it if you could just take any tile you wanted, like a lot of other of these tile placement games. So this one just kind of felt limited in a way that really just kind of made it more of a challenge than it really needed to be. So I don't know, we kind of liked it, but we thought, again, of all the tile placement games we have, would I play this or simple Carcassonne? And the answer was Carcassonne. Anyways, that was Caracas. Up next, we broke out. I'm going to take the for sale sticker off of this one. This is Kingdom Builder by Queen Games. I have had this for quite a while. We bought this in town used from somebody over a year ago and just never played it. Just sat on the shelf of shame forever. This is a very, very simple game. Who is this by? This is by Donald Vaccarino. Don't recognize that name. But a pretty well-known game. Spiel des Jahres winner 2012. But this is a game where you've got these large boards. You have a deck of sort of landscape cards. You're going to draw a card. You're always going to have just one of these cards. And then on your turn, you sort of play that card. And then you have to place 3 of these little kind of hut tokens onto 3 spaces corresponding to that environment. So if you have a grassland card, you have to put 3 of these little tokens on grassland hexes on this map. And if at all possible, they have to be adjacent to spaces that you already have other tokens on. And most times you can do that. Most of the time you can kind of expand wherever, and playing adjacent. But actually it turns out to be beneficial if you're not able to place it adjacent, because then you can place it anywhere you want on that same environment. It has to be on that, environment type. But if you cannot legally place it next to something you already have, then you can kind of place it wherever you want. And that actually lets you kind of start leapfrogging all over the board and having even more flexibility on future placements, because there are these symbols, and if you build next to a symbol, you then get a little token that gives you an extra action for the rest of the game. There are these castles. If you manage to build next to these castles, again, you're going to get endgame scoring. And then all this boils down to 3 cards that come out at the beginning of the game, and each of these set up different scoring criteria for the end of the game. And so it was interesting because, as you're getting these extra action tokens, you're suddenly going, okay, well, I can place these here. And then this action lets me place something out here. This one lets me build on water, which you normally can't do. And there are, just all these different abilities that kind of come out. And it was a nice puzzle, but it actually reminded me of a much newer game called Guild of Merchant Explorers. I think I've talked about that here on the channel before. And that game felt a bit more strategic, a bit more cunning, a bit more sort of advanced planning and how you might want to try and get things done. Although it does have a little bit more of a randomness than this game does, but maybe also not, because again, you only ever have one landscape you can build on your turn, whereas oftentimes with the Guild of Merchant Explorers, you might actually have some extra flexibility depending on the type of cards that you have actually built into your deck. So you kind of create a little bit of uniqueness in the way that you play things with Merchant Explorers. Did not dislike this, but we kind of sat there afterwards going, well, how many more times do we think we're going to play this versus how many more times do I want to play Guilds? And we decided to stick with that game. And interestingly enough, again, despite the popularity of this, I had this out for quite cheap at the market, and nobody picked it up. So anyways, that was Kingdom Builder by Queen Games. The next game, so that day when my daughter got home from school, went out for, I think, a quick little bite to eat or something like that. And then one game I was thinking about selling was Cat Lady with this is the Box of Treats expansion. This is a very simple card drafting game with sort of a set collection aspect, set collection slash, point salad, sort of like Sushi Go. You're collecting these cat cards. Once you have cat cards that kind of get played in front of you, some of the cards that you're collecting give you various types of food: milk, tuna, and chicken. There's also wild, and then there's also cat treats in this expansion. And so you're feeding these cats. Once they're fed, they're worth points to you. There's also costumes that you're collecting. Whoever has the most of those gets points at the end of the game. Whoever has the least loses points. There is also catnip. The more catnip that you collect, the more that your cats start to score at the end of the game. If you don't have enough catnip, though, you will lose points. And then there's, so the expansion added boxes, which I did think was pretty funny. You can actually put your cat in a box, and the number of boxes that you have, I should say each box will score for how many boxes you have. So it's kind of this exponential curve, right? So 1 box is worth a point, 2 boxes are worth 2 points each, 3 are worth 3 points each, so etc. Except for there's only, I think, 3 in the entire game, at least for the 3-player game. There's basically 1 per player, and we each got 1, so it didn't really do anything for us. It's been a while since we played this, and in fact, I could not find a rulebook for this at all. I had to download it on the internet, which thankfully it was there. I did enjoy this, and I think both my wife and daughter kind of struggled to get the cards that they wanted, but it's a very simple game. There's not a lot of good cat games out there. I decided to actually hold on to this. It's very, very simple. Again, in that sort of Sushi Go formula of, okay, I'm just trying to get the cards I need to sort of generate things. Okay, well, they've got a couple of costumes, so I better try and get some. I ended up with every catnip card in the game, just the way that they came out. Sometimes it wasn't even on purpose that I took them. And I won this, I think, with almost twice the score of my wife, who I think beat my daughter by only 2. I just enjoy this. Again, it's very simple. I think we could play this at like the pub or something when we go there. It's not this breakout amazing strategy game, but I still did enjoy it. Cat Lady and the Box of Treats expansion. The last game that my wife and I played, and this is an older one. I'm actually missing a box that I had sitting here. But anyways, the last game that my wife and I played that night was Sierra West. And I was surprised to see that this is from Johnny Pack, who was recently on the 5 Games for Doomsday podcast. And he was talking about the Coloma game that just kind of ended up getting canceled by Final Frontier Games. This is from Board and Dice. I don't remember which year this came out, but I do believe it is a slightly older game. This says copyright 2019, so sometime around there. I don't remember exactly when I got this, but I've had this for a while. In 2022, when we first moved into this house, we took a vacation, and I remember bringing this game with me. I remember reading the rule book at the fire pit at the back of a cabin in Pennsylvania that we rented for a long weekend, and we never played it until the other day. And I don't even know how to describe this. I'll try and do it quickly. It's this kind of mixture of you're going up tracks. You've got a couple of tracks that you go up for various resources, and then you have a wagon track. And at the end of the game, you're going to multiply your position on the wagon track against your positions on the resource tracks. Those are going to give you a bunch of end game score. You've got sort of this deck of cards that you start off with, and you're tucking them into a player board, and you're going to be adding cards from this mountain into your deck. And then you have a player board where those cards get tucked. And there are some cabins on the bottom. There are these 2 little tracker and trapper spaces on that player board. And then again, you have these notches at the top that you're putting these cards into. And you've got these 2 meeples that stay on your player board. They can go to the cabins to activate bonuses for each other. So you put one of your meeples on the brown cabin, and that gives some benefits to the green track, or the green cabin gives the benefits to the brown track. And so you can kind of put a worker on the cabin and then let the other worker climb up their track to get various bonuses or actions or resources or whatever. And then you can move the other worker up and have him go across his track. And then at the end of the track, you get to then move up to the top of these cards and take these summon actions, which will help you go up other things on the mountain board. It's a lot. And it was definitely a little weird. We didn't really get any idea of a theme of sort of moving across the Sierra, out into the Wild Wild West, this kind of whole painting for gold, the gold rush sort of era. We didn't really feel any of that. And I will also say that the rule book was terrible. There were literally some contradictions within its own text. There were whole sections that were just left out until far later in the rulebook. It would tell you, well, play these cards into this area and put your worker at the bottom of this track, but it didn't tell you at all what that area was or what those cards were or where that track actually was. The images didn't show you where to actually put the workers, and then you'd flip the page and it would tell you, oh, here's what those cards are, and if you're playing in this mode, this is where that track starts. And it's like, oh, geez, I've been sitting here for like 10 minutes flipping backwards through the rule book to try and see if I missed something. No, I had to actually read further forward, and I should have just kept reading, and it was pissing me off, if I'm honest with you. The one interesting thing with this, and I'll flip it over, is that you've got these 4 different modes of play. You've got this Apple Hill, Boats and Banjos, Gold Rush, and the Outlaws and Outposts. And we played the Apple Hill mode. It was, for your first play, use this. And I was having so much trouble with the rule book that I wasn't even going to bother trying to get into the other modes. None of it, as I said, really felt like you were doing what it said you were doing. You didn't have this idea of climbing a mountain. You didn't really have any feeling of deck building. You didn't really have any feeling of trying to survive on this sort of, expedition out to the west. But my wife actually kind of liked it. She was like, this is weird, but I really am sort of enjoying this puzzle. I feel like I'm getting a hang of it. We decided not to sell this. We're going to try and go back and revisit some of these other modes, at least 1 or 2 more of them, sort of see what else is in this box. Like I said, the rulebook was terrible, and I'm not looking forward to diving into this again. I need to play it again before we forget how the heck it worked, so I don't have to relearn it. Very, very colorful game. Hopefully you've seen some of these photos. A very, very pretty looking game. Just a little funky in how it worked. And maybe I'll talk some more about this in the near future. This is Sierra West. As I mentioned, I misplaced... No, here it is. Forgot to move it over. The last game we played just earlier today was Canar from Pandasaurus Games. Like I said, this is a game about Vikings, and I would call this a very watered down version of Champions of Midgard. You've got a simple little boat tile in front of you. You start off with a couple of Vikings. The Vikings are sort of in this rainbow pattern. You've got red, yellow, green, blue, and purple. The Vikings have symbols on top of them, so as you acquire more Vikings, you stack them in the colors, or stacks of colors in front of you. You have your own collection of Vikings, and when you play a new Viking to a color, you trigger all the bonuses that those Vikings give you. And then once you have a certain collection of Vikings, you can take an explore action, and you're taking cards from another spot on the sort of the main board and placing them above your ship. And those are locations that you have gone to. They will cost you Vikings, so you may have a location that costs you 2 purples and 2 reds, and so you have to have those Vikings. You sort of discard them out of your play area, and then you have explored that location. As you're stacking these locations above your shipboard, you start to get these little columns of icons above your ship, and you can spend this silver ring resource as a sort of a trading action, an optional action on your turn to trigger all the things in 1, 2, or all 3 of the columns above your ship. And as you're doing all of this, you're going up this little reputation track. Once you start getting high enough up the reputation track, you'll actually start getting points at the beginning of each one of your turns. Of course, playing Vikings may give you points. Traveling or exploring these locations may give you points. When you trigger that trading action, you might get points, and the first person to simply get the 40 points wins the game at the end of the round when everyone has had an equal number of turns. This was really, really simple. We had really no problems getting into this. By comparison, a very good rule book in here. No questions really as we got into it. And it was kind of funny because I felt like my wife, man, she was jumping ahead of me on score right away. I think she was already at 10 and I was at maybe 1 or 2. But I was pushing on the exploration cards. I was getting a lot of those. Like, I never had any Vikings. She had racks and racks of all these Vikings, but I was able to start doing trading, and I was getting a lot of points from my trade actions, and that helped me catch up. I stayed ahead of her on the reputation track and started generating those extra pre-turn points on each one of my turns. And it was actually kind of funny. She hit the 40 points before I did, and I was like, damn it, I still didn't pull it off. And she goes, well, no, I was first player, so you still get your turn. I was like, oh, that's right. And I ended up winning like 50 to 42 or something like that. So that just kind of cheered me up because I was like, damn it, I thought I'd kind of like recovered, then I still lost. No, actually, I did okay. I like this. I like this quite a bit. Really nice production, really nice artwork. Very, very simple game. We played this at the Center of the Universe Brewing Company here in town. They had a food truck out, so it's kind of the whole family went out. My daughter was playing arcade games. My wife and I played a nice little Viking game, and we had a great time. This is Canar by Pandasaurus Games. That is it for recently played games, and that is almost the end of this episode, but it is time to introduce the question for next week, and this one is going to be a little bit of a doozy. Let me go ahead and introduce the idea, and that is, what are your thoughts on board games that use AI art? This is a very polarizing topic. I get it. And the only thing I'm going to say for now, I don't want to play my cards, but I want you to take a little bit of an open-minded approach to your answer. Sort of think it through just a little bit before you, sort of weigh in, because there are definitely a lot of cons to AI art, but there are arguably some pros to it as well. And so I'm really interested to see what folks are going to think, and I'm interested in chatting about this a bit more next week. Folks, that is the end of episode number 58. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for watching. Again, welcome all of our new subscribers and members. I'm looking forward to hearing from a lot of you in next week's episode and all those going forward. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.